Hey, how's it going? It's your Challenger Coach, Moriarty here to bring you a new video where I'm gonna go over the mistakes I personally made when I picked up the game in Season 3 and grinded to Challenger for the first time so that hopefully you don't make them as well. So without any further delay, let's go over the mistakes one by one and how to fix them. One of the first things I did wrong, and that many people do wrong, is skipping out on some of the more boring fundamentals of League of Legends in favor of just spamming what they think is fun. Okay, no joke, the first thing I did when I hit the rank ladder was lock in Lee Sin in every single game, without exception, red buff into level 2 gank, which effectively made me learn nothing, so even though I was able to hit gold by doing this, I wasn't truly a gold level jungler. What that meant was that if asked to play any other champion or style, I just straight up would feed, as my fundamental knowledge of how the game worked and how to win was pretty flawed, as I didn't actually learn the core aspects of being a jungler, so I had no ability to adapt whatsoever. If Lee Sin level 2 ganking wasn't a thing, I was pretty doomed. You can also stunt your growth by learning the wrong fundamental skills for your role. For example, just off the top of my head, if you're an ADC main with, let's say, LEC level vision control, but LCS level farming, then you likely won't climb up very high with that set of skills, as it doesn't really suit the role's strength. To make sure this kind of thing doesn't happen to you though, I'm gonna list off which fundamental GPI skills are most important for each role so that you know what to focus on. For top lane, focus on dueling, skirmishing, or team fighting based on your champion, farming, and below 1 solo deaths and gank deaths per game. For a jungle, it's skirmishing, picks, gank initiative, and low gank deaths with a little vision control and pre-10 minute pathing. For mid lane, you're going to want to focus on skirmishing or team fighting based on your champion, along with farming, a little bit of vision, and an average of 4 deaths a game. For bot lane, it's pretty simple. You're going to want to focus on team fighting, stat contribution, farming again because it's that important, an average of 4 deaths a game or below. And finally, support, it's skirmishing, team fighting, and vision. Tip number 2 will be about wasting time learning the wrong champions or roles. When I first started playing League, like many of you, I preferred the flashy fun champions. For example, Lee Sin jungle, LeBlanc mid, Ezreal AD carry, Thresh support once he came out, and Aurelia top lane were my favorites. Which ended up being a huge waste of time, as I spent most of the games learning how to play Lee Sin and Thresh mechanically rather than learning how to actually win a game of League of Legends for once. Don't get me wrong, I did have a lot of fun even when losing on those champions, but I had a lot more fun once I got significantly better at the game. Which for me happened once I started to main both Twisted Fate and Orianna mid lane, as it allowed me to focus more on the bigger picture of the game, things like when to roam, set up picks around objective timers, or just proper lane control and positioning. This of course is advice you've probably already heard 1,000 times, but I'd like to add my own advice and spin onto it. So here it goes. Ideally when learning the game, in order, these are the rules you want to learn to give you the most well-rounded fundamentals. It's going to go mid lane, then top lane, then a bit of a dip into AD carry, then a big dip into jungle support. AD carry being low as it doesn't need to roam or make map plays or really vision control, while jungle and support being even lower as they do not naturally learn about lane control or farming mechanics. But more importantly than learning the correct role, it's about making sure you main the correct champions. If you're serious about learning as quickly as possible, you'll want to stick to easy to execute champions that can be flexed between mid or top to give you the maximum amount of value for your time. Example of these champions are of course Annie, Orianna, Twisted Fate, or even Lissandra, who are able to teach you proper fundamentals like positioning, lane control, farming, and roaming, but can still be played in more than one role. Tip number 3 will be about spamming a lot of games without a purpose. One of the most common things people do when they first start learning the game is to just mindlessly spam a bunch of games in an attempt to gain as much experience as possible, which is something that I did as well. But to be honest, this approach can yield some results, as it did for me when I first started playing. The problem with it is of course how inefficient it is time-wise, while also potentially solidifying poor habits. Not everyone's just gonna have an infinite amount of time to play the game, and even if you did, you'd still want to make the most of it, and to do that, you'll want to use deliberate practice to make the quickest gains in your League of Legends skills. The concept is pretty simple. It just boils down to making sure that you're practicing one aspect of the game at a time while spamming your games. For example, if I notice my farming isn't as strong as an AD carry main in the early game, then for that day, every single game, I'm gonna put as much focus as I can on my early game CS and wave control until it becomes a habit, and once it's on autopilot, you can just move on to the next topic. Personally, if I had actually done this, I know my fundamentals in CSing in the early game would be a lot better than they are right now, but due to neglecting it early on in my development, it became a lot harder to remove bad habits later down the line, so I needed to put in so much extra effort just to fix my early game CS, which, really isn't my lifestyle. Tip number 4 will be about learning from watching the pros versus people in your own games. One of the things that I loved to do when I first wanted to make a push for Challenger was of course watch every single Faker game played back in Season 3. I even bought a pass to watch OGN so that I could copy what the best mid laner in the world was doing. This ended up being a pretty big mistake, as not only was it difficult to recreate his playstyle, but also many of the plays he was making relied on the backup of his teammates and communicating with them through voice comms. which led me to having something you might find familiar in having a really distorted game sense, where I was expecting both my team and the opponents to react in a specific way, causing me to make some really dumb engagement with no follow-up or trying to make a flash predict only to have the person just stand still on me. Instead, what really helped me learn the game quickly was when I heard a quote from Dopa saying that the only reason he became a Castlet and TF main was because someone actually beat him with those champions and he got so upset about it, he decided to main them and do it better. The lesson that I want you to learn from that is rather than watching pro-level games, it's actually easier and more effective to learn from the people in your own games. I get it, but even if they are worse than pros, you can still easily copy a strategy that they use because they're close to your skill level. So if you can just put your ego aside just for a little bit and continuously learn from the people who are around you and beat you, then you can actually just climb a lot quicker. An example of this can be when you notice you lose a lot of games because your bot lane feeds because they're not listening to your pings when the enemy Talon roams. We've probably all been there. Instead of flaming your bot lane, you can actually just try this strategy out for yourself with Talon or a different champion that suits you and make the enemy mid laner flame his bot lane instead. Much better. Tip number 5 will be about when and how you should watch your own replays. It's pretty common nowadays for people to just blanket statement and tell people to watch their own replays to learn faster, which can actually be harmful to how quickly you grow as a player. When I first hit Diamond, I actually decided I wanted to be more serious about the game and start watching my own replays like the pros to get better, so I spent hours every single day looking them over. What ended up happening is I spent so much time watching them that my mechanics actually slipped, and I really didn't learn that much, or at least as much as I would have liked. This happened because I was watching the replays just for the sake of it without a specific goal, nor did I truly have the knowledge to properly look over my own replays at that point in time, or even playing enough to implement what I was learning. To make sure this doesn't happen to you, here are some rules or guidelines for watching replays. First up, only watch a replay with one specific metric of the game in mind, like dodging ganks for example. Then you're going to want to watch that replay for that section and just skip to every single time you gank. None of the other aspects of the game should matter. Identify what happened, then move on to the next replay until you find a pattern as to why you're dying for ganks. You're only going to want to watch replays when you feel like you're stuck on a specific metric to improve for a long time, otherwise it's better to just keep playing games. Also, unfortunately, the lower you are on the ladder, the less often you should be watching your own replays, as just in general, it's easy and more effective to watch better players play in solo queue and copy them for their kill patterns, for example, than watching your own games. So hopefully these tips will save you some time when thinking about watching your own replays. Tip number 6 will be about consistency and mental fortitude. Thing is, when you're climbing to higher ranks for the first time, it's gonna take a while and the journey is going to be hard. This is because not only do you always have to be looking to improve, but it needs to be at a rate that is faster than everyone else around you, and since so many people actually play this game, it can be hard in itself. Combine that with the fact that just the massive amount of time investment needed to play the games out to reach Challenger with regular MMR, and you are bound to struggle at some point. You'll likely even end up like I did with games where you just pop off and go 10-0, or the reverse in the Yasuo power spike, which was fairly frequent for me back in the day because I actually did play Yasuo in my main champion pool, which makes me really disappointed in my past self. Anyway, the effect of that was that at the end of the day, I really didn't climb that much because all I would see in my match history was either full red or full green, but still back to square one. To make sure you don't end up climbing nowhere because you're a streaky player due to your emotions, here are some tips to help with consistency. First up, you're going to want to disable nameplates on the scoreboard and in-game, which you probably heard before, but I take it a step further. You're going to want to view your teammates and opponents as NPCs. Personally, I see them as stormtroopers, but it's totally up to you. The reason I do this is to reduce frustration that other people can bring to me and make the game more about my own decisions and reactions to what the random NPCs are doing, similar to how a poker player would think about random hands they get. It's just something that helps me be a little bit more objective about the game. After you're done with that, you're going to want to remove the chat if it distracts you, and I'm going to be honest with you. If you had to think about whether it distracts you, then it probably distracts you. After I remove the chat, I remove the chat. It's a really simple and easy thing to do to make the game more peaceful. Another small tip to help you with kind of longer sessions is rather than thinking about your overall LP gains, just keep track of your overall record for that day. If you lose 3 or more in a row, simply take a break. Also, when you're in a game and the surrender vote does not go through, even if you think the game is lost, your only job is to think about what is the next best play you can make rather than if you can win the game or not. This one helps particularly if you're a little bit tilted already because your judgment is already off that game, so if you're an O10 Rise, you knowing whether the game is won or not is probably not that accurate. Although that probably wasn't the best example because you are playing Rise in that one and you probably will lose that game, but still, my point stands. Tip number 7 will be about dodging and when to do it. Lots of people, including myself early on, would either dodge too frequently or not at all, or just for the wrong reasons. So I'm gonna keep this one short and just list off the proper reasons why you should dodge. The first one will be if you're on an off roll that you don't play and you suck on it. The amount of times that I've done a profile review of someone with a 45% win rate jungle off roll has been far too many, and I'm hoping I don't have to see it more often. This is especially true if you end up in a counter matchup, like how can you troll your team by off-roll picking Kassadin top lane into like Talon or something and letting the game go through? Just don't do that. The second reason to dodge would be if your team has no on-roll carry players. I'm gonna give you an example of this. If your top laner is on Maokai, he mains top lane. Your jungler mains jungle, they're on Sejuani. Your mid laner mains mid lane, they're on Zilean. You have a support main on Janna, but you've got an off-roll jungle main on Ezreal, then you have no one to actually carry the game, and so it's a likely dodge if you have that free dodge timer for the day. The third reason, it's gonna sound a little harsh, but I'm gonna explain it, alright? 3 support mains or 3 jungle mains are probably a dodge. As I've mentioned in the previous tips, these 2 roles are most commonly lacking in laning fundamentals, so having too many of them on one team ends up mostly being a disaster. Tip number 4 is AD carry mains on Lee Sin. Okay, hold on. You might think I'm joking about this, but statistically, AD carry mains playing jungle just in general have the worst main role to off-roll win rate, with an average of 45%. This includes support mains to jungle, even worse than them. Add on to it, specifically Lee Sin, a common off-roll champion, and it actually drops to an average of 39% win rate, according to the internal data we have on it. The 5th tip will be about one of the most common dodge myths, and that's to always dodge full AD comps. Sure, if the enemy team's got a bunch of tanks like Ornn and 2 carries who build Zhonya's, go for it, dodge. But if the enemy team does not have people who stack armor or a lot of Zhonya users, then it's totally fine to be a full AD comp if it means you have winning matchups. And last up, the most obvious one, if someone is holding the lobby hostage, for example, someone comes into chat being super racist, picking Nunu at Ghost Cleanse, then it's a safe bet to dodge. Tip number 8 is about the big debate between if you should always main meta champions or stick to your own playstyle even if it is off meta, or even people who think you should always play off meta to gain matchup knowledge advantage. Well, one of my regrets when climbing up was I actually ended up trying all 3 camps of thought out, so I'll just tell you the most effective path when it comes to choosing champions. At the end of the day, what I found out was that the only thing that mattered when it came to picking a champion was results. If you main something meta or off meta, it's pretty irrelevant as long as you win on it. That means you do not change your champion pool if you're still climbing, regardless if it's considered meta or not. What is relevant though is abandoning champions once they fail you. When you're building your champion pool, you're going to keep champions above 50% and you're going to Shadow Realm champions who are below 48% for extended periods of time, even if you really like those champions. In the past, my boy Dopa was known for his amazing Zed. Champ got nerfed, he didn't touch that champion for 2 years. He had no regrets. For me, it was my LeBlanc, who I love to play, just hated when she got reworked, so I never went back to her because I sucked at that version. I'll still play her in normals to show off a little bit, but just never in ranked because she's failed me too many times in my promos for me to forgive her. One thing I will say though, when looking to pick up a new champion to replace an old underperforming one, I would look at S or A tier champions that are easy to learn as the first place you should look, as it's likely the best use of your time. Tip number 9 is about avoiding tilting sprees. Lots of people, including me, have done this thing where you play even though you know that you're tilted, and you give yourself this really dumb excuse that you're gonna play through the tilt, or even sometimes you might not somehow notice you get on a 10-game loss streak. You know, some days it just happens. For me personally, I know this feeling probably better than any of you, as I still remember going from rank 20 in season 5 to 0 LP Masters in the span of 3 days, which is a loss of over 800 LP and included a 23-game loss streak. Now that's some real tilt, okay? Nowadays, of course, this doesn't happen to me anymore, and I've got a specific trick to help me avoid that during long sessions, so hopefully it'll help you too. Kid you not, when I know I'm going to be playing a longer session, I come into the session with an anti-tilt backup plan. Pretty much what I do is I tell myself, okay, if I feel frustrated or overly tilted, I'm gonna go to the gym or go do some work or hang out with some friends, play some Smash Bros at the office. Doesn't really matter what it is, as long as it isn't League of Legends related. The reason this actually works so well is oftentimes on longer tilt sprees, you continue to play simply because you feel like you have nothing better to do, so instead you try and play through the loss streak, but if you have a set up plan to do something productive or fun ahead of time, you're more likely to hit the eject button on that session and go do that thing instead. I really wish I did this earlier on in my League career, because not only would I be more jacked, but I could have that 800 LP back, which I could really use right now. Tip number 10 is the one that would have helped my growth the most, and it's about sticking to your own playstyle, then branching out and adapting. One of the biggest mistakes I made was attempting to be a Faker fanboy and copying his style of play rather than keeping my own. After watching Faker just absolutely style on Season 3 Worlds, I thought that the easiest and fastest way to improve would be to simply just copy his champion pool and how he plays, which to be honest did work a bit at first. Back then, he just had this really disrespectful, in-your-face style where he relied on his inhuman reaction speed and game sense to outplay people, which was never really my forte. So initially, I did find some success when I increased my aggression. It just also made me play wildly unstable and inconsistent, as I'm not really naturally gifted when it comes to reaction speed. Or I can just blame NA ping. That's probably a little easier. What did actually help me improve the most out of any of the tips so far was looking at my strengths as a player, which you can use the GPI for that nowadays, but back then, I figured that my lane control, my roaming, my split pushing, and my calculated aggression were my biggest strengths. After that, what I did is I looked to find champions that suited my playstyle that were also strong, which ended up being Twisted Fate. And finally, after I did that, I found a player who was better than me with the same style and similar champion pool, which if you haven't guessed by now is obviously Dopa. Once I was able to actually acknowledge my own strengths rather than what I perceived them to be or what I wanted them to be, and then find a mentor to learn from, my growth as a player really skyrocketed and it allowed me to perfect a playstyle that really worked for me as I climbed. And once I'd actually climbed up to Challenger, I had internalized so many concepts on autopilot that it was a lot easier for me to branch out to learn new champions or even new roles. To recap everything and to give you one final piece of advice though, to all you future Challenger players, please don't make the same mistakes I did, especially the 23 game loss streak one. That one will quite literally haunt me forever. That's it for the tips I wish I knew on my Climb to Challenger video. If you like this kind of content, have any suggestions for other topics, have suggestions to make the video better, or just want to let me know if you thought it was helpful, please leave a comment, as I do read every single one to try and get some feedback. Make sure to check out our other videos on this channel, as well as Mobalytics.gg, and as always, I'm Moriarty, and hopefully I'll see you out on the Rift.